Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ron Resch from Simon Fraser University, and it is a real pleasure for me to introduce the presidential address this year. Patricia Zapf was one of my graduate students. She got her PhD at Simon Fraser University, and she is the fourth person from SFU, with some SFU connection, to be president of APLS. But the very first, but she has the distinction of being the very first one who has received her PhD from our forensic program at SFU. So we're very proud of her at Simon Fraser University, and I'm delighted to be here. Patty, as I said, was one of my students, and I continue to work with her. We worked on a number of projects together and publications together, so I'm glad that we have been able to continue to collaborate. And I consider her not just a former student or a collaborator, but a very close friend. So congratulations, Patty, on being president this year. I'll just give you a kind of brief introduction to Patty, and then I'll turn it over to her for her talk. When she left us, she took a job at the University of Alabama, and she was there for a couple of years before moving on to John Jay, where she is now and has been promoted now to full professor. So congratulations on that as well.
Thank you.
She is, as most of you know, the editor of our book series and the associate editor of Broadening papers. So she's very involved in this organization, in addition to her current role as president. One of the remarkable things I've always found for Patty is that she puts a lot of time into her career, but she also has time to do other things. And while she was in British Columbia, she did the Ironman. Finished that. She's done a number of triathlons and half Ironmen, and she even climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. So she is a very well-rounded scholar and athlete who's done some remarkable things, I think, and that she also has played on a hockey team for many years and continues to do that. So somehow she finds time to do all these things and yet be a highly productive academic. So she's going to, and I'm looking forward to hearing what her thoughts are about how we can broaden our reach to make psychology and law attractive or bring it to the masses. And so that's what she's going to talk about today. So I want you all to welcome Patricia Zapf and her presidential address.
Thank you, Ron, for that generous introduction, and I love you, and I love that after 22 years, you're still one of my biggest supporters. Our relationship really means a lot to me, and I'm thankful to have had you as an advisor, and to have you as a colleague, and most importantly, to have you as a friend. Thank you all for being here with me this afternoon. It's not a bad time slot, I guess, being the last session of the day on the first day of the conference. Everyone's still excited to be here, but no one's too tired just yet from all the late nights. I guess that starts tomorrow after the late night tonight. And the good news about this last session is that we get to roll into a quick 30-minute business meeting where you can come and meet your executive committee and learn about all of the things that are going on in this organization and learn about all the different ways that you can become involved in this organization should you desire to. And then we are rewarded with a cocktail hour. I mean, a welcome reception, at which I'm sure there must be cocktails. So, thank you for attending, and I look forward to engaging with each of you over the course of the next few days. I've been thinking a lot about what to say at this address for more than a year now. In fact, one of the first thoughts that went through my mind when I learned that I had been elected president was, oh shit, now I have to give an address. What the hell am I going to say? So I started thinking and paying a closer attention to my thoughts and my feelings, and my behaviors, just like a good psychologist, taking note of the things that I was doing and the reasons why I was doing them, to the things that were important to me and the things that I had learned that might make an impact on you, our members, on our field and on our society. I thought about the people who had influenced me and the ways in which they had influenced my view of the field. Started thinking about what other former APLS presidents had spoken about in their addresses and ways that I might be able to tie together a coherent message about our field to present in this address. And I distinctly recall Ed Mulvey's presidential address. He gave his address at the APLS meeting in Vancouver, near and dear to my heart, in 2010. And I can still picture myself sitting there in the grand ballroom of the Westin Bayshore, enraptured with what he was saying. Both his message of doing work that makes a difference in people's lives and the personal story that he was weaving throughout his address. It brought out a side of Ed that I had never experienced, not being one of his close friends or anyone who had even had more than a few short, professionally oriented conversations with him. And I felt that I knew Ed a little bit better after his address and had more of an appreciation for what motivated him to do the work that he does. And similarly, when I read Ron Rush's presidential address, which was published in Law and Human Behavior in 1995, I didn't actually attend Ron's address. I was a young, fresh, naive graduate student who had begun at Simon Fraser in September of 1993, and Ron gave his address at APA in August of 1994. But when I read his address, the part that most clearly stayed in my mind was the personal information that he wove throughout his address to give the listener, or the reader, as the case may be, a sense of who he was as a person and how his personal experiences have shaped the way he looks at, reacts to, and works within the field. So I think it's important to share with you a little bit about myself as I take you on this journey of trying to explain how I think about the field and what I think we can do to push this field forward. So I guess the story really begins with that young, naive undergraduate student from Edmonton, Alberta, who had the great fortune of being interviewed by a young Stephen Hart at the Airport Hotel in Calgary for a position in the clinical psychology doctoral program at Simon Fraser University. So pairs of faculty from Simon Fraser would fly around to different cities within the country to interview doctoral candidates who didn't travel to to Vancouver to be interviewed. And I've already mentioned that I was naive, so I didn't even really consider flying out to Vancouver to interview at the only 2 graduate programs that I had applied to, right? Again, very naive. So as the story goes, apparently Stephen Hart and David Cox, who was the other faculty interviewer, returned to SFU and told Ron Resch that they met a student who would be a great match. That's the words that were used when they told me the story. I don't know what the real words that were used. But shortly thereafter, Ron admitted me as his graduate student. And I didn't know at the time how fortunate I really was. I mean, I felt fortunate because I was admitted to Simon Fraser University and I was happy to have Ron as my mentor, but I didn't realize how much of an impact that Ron would come to have on my life. Ron taught me to work hard, but to enjoy life. He taught me the importance of giving my time to serve as a leader in this field, and he taught me not to take myself too seriously. The other thing that Ron taught me through his patience and understanding was that he would love and support me no matter what. And this gave me the permission to grow as an individual and to take the direction that I cared to take with my professional career. He didn't care what I was going to do. He would love me and support me no matter what. And to do so without being crushed by the negative words of others. So I've thought a lot about those lessons, and I've come to understand their importance to the direction that I've taken with my career. So with the love and support of Ron and countless others, I made my way into the field as an academic, beginning my career at the University of Alabama, and then being recruited away just a few short years later by John Jay College of Criminal Justice to come to New York City and build a doctoral program in clinical forensic psychology. So this was, of course, a unique and exciting opportunity and one that very few people are offered in a lifetime. So I moved to New York City and began building a doctoral program. Let me tell you, that is hard work. To start from nothing, no policies, no procedures, no manuals, no curriculum, no structure, and no doctoral students. But we did have the beginnings of a strong faculty, and we kept adding new faculty members, in droves, it sometimes seemed, for several years while we engaged in the process of developing goals, objectives, and desired outcomes for the program, policies, procedures, curriculum, structure, and eventually, doctoral students. Now, as you might imagine, the amount of work and the degree of effort involved in pushing a fledgling program forward through a quagmire of never-ending levels of bureaucracy, both within the university and outside, can become overwhelming. And so, just when I needed it most, but didn't actually know it, I received a phone call from my then 65-year-old uncle, now deceased, who was a Catholic priest and who had been a missionary in Tanzania when he was in his early 30s. My uncle had been diagnosed with multiple myeloma, and he wanted to return to Africa before he died. He called me up and he told me about this wonderful IMAX called To the Roof of Africa, about a trek up Mount Kilimanjaro, the highest freestanding mountain in the world at 19,341 feet. I was on the phone with him, kind of half listening as he was telling me about the movie, on my computer, answering emails, half attending, which is the way I was spending most of my time those days. And he asked me if I wanted to climb Mount Kilimanjaro with him, to which I answered sure. Not really taking him seriously, not really even knowing whether this was something that could truly be done or if this was just some pie-in-the-sky idea that was never going to come to fruition. And his response to my half-attending sure was one of pure joy. He got excited, his voice raised in pitch. He started telling me that it would be great, that he was so excited to spend the time with me. He started using words like awesome and epic. Well, needless to say, I got off the phone and looked at my husband and said, I think I just committed to climbing Mount Kilimanjaro with Phil. As it turns out, that trip would change my life. On September 15th, 2005, I left from JFK to fly over to Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, to meet up with my uncle to go on this amazing journey. For 3 weeks, I would be out of contact. No phones, no email, no computer, no internet, no contact. For 3 weeks, I did nothing but live in the moment. For 3 weeks, I got to just be, without students or faculty coming into my office asking one thing or another of me, without obligations or commitments, without any of the trappings of our lives here in North America. And during that 3-week period, I came to know myself a little better. I felt happy. I felt free. I realized that all the hard work and all the drive that I had been putting into my career and this new doctoral program was leaving me drained and miserable and unfulfilled. I returned from this trip having met a wonderful group of people who had reaffirmed for me the importance of sharing time and stories and making connections with others. Reaffirmed for me the importance of loving what I do and feeling a sense of peace at the end of the day, of being with family and of feeling like I am making a difference in the world. The beauty and nature of Tanzania and the Serengeti were very grounding. I had never felt so connected to the earth. I was truly able to just breathe. So I did a lot of thinking upon my return from Africa. The trip gave me a chance to realign my priorities and focus on what's really important in life. That trip reminded me that relationships are so much more important than achievements, and that there was more to life than just driving hard on the work front. And then a series of events occurred that just kind of locked it down for me. My brother, my only sibling, 2 years younger than myself, had been hit from behind playing junior hockey when he was 18 and rendered a quadriplegic. And he became ill. He and his family, his wife and family, were living in Florida, and he had gotten an infection that became septic. And given his pre-existing condition of being a quadriplegic, he wasn't insured, so he held off on seeking medical attention until the situation was quite dire. The fear in his wife's voice as we exchanged multiple phone calls each day during this time reinforced my need to be near family. My husband and I made the decision to move to Florida to be near my brother and family and to help them out. I resigned my positions as Director of Clinical Training and Deputy Director of our doctoral program and put those responsibilities in the capable hands of my friend and colleague, Michelle Gallietta, and attempted to resign my position at John Jay, but our president, Jeremy Travis, refused to accept my resignation. Instead, he gave me 3 years of released time from teaching so that I could focus on writing the policies, procedures, goals, objectives, student handbook, clinical training manual, and all the backbone for our doctoral program, and to write our first self-study report for APA. The deal was that in 3 years, I would return to Jeremy's office and let him know whether I would continue on in academia or whether my path had taken me elsewhere. And I will always be thankful to Jeremy Travis for that opportunity. I can vividly recall a conversation that I had with Joel DeVoskin shortly after I left New York. Joel had called me up to chat about a research idea he had, and I told him that I had moved to Florida and was transitioning out of academia. Joel chatted me for a while about this and listened to my reasons and my feelings, and then he said something that has stuck with me to this day. He said, "I know that you can do whatever you want, but I really hope that you'll stay in the field and change the world." He told me that I was too smart not to do anything big and that someone like me could change the world. Well, that might sound lofty to you, or it might not, but what I came to understand from Joel's message were 2 things. 1, that even little actions can change the world, and 2, that we have a responsibility to use our gifts to make the world a better place. I continued to think a lot about Joel's words and the sentiment behind them, and knew that I needed to find a way to do something that would have an impact, that would push the field forward, and that would serve as a model for others who might be struggling with their own identities within the field. You see, I was having somewhat of an existential crisis. I was an academic who had entered the field young, pushed hard, rose quickly, and then started to wonder what it was really all about. One of the events in that series of events was that the program of research that I had worked years to build came to a crashing halt when one of my graduate students was assaulted by a patient on the ward. My graduate student had been interviewing an incompetent defendant who had been sent for restoration as part of a big research project that it had taken years to implement. She and the defendant were in an interview room on a vacant wing, and the day staff on the unit forgot that she was down there. One of the staff members had instructed a patient who was becoming agitated to go onto the ward and calm himself, but instead he grabbed a chair and slammed it down on my graduate student while she was interviewing the defendant. The institution reacted poorly to this incident and pulled the plug on any research that was being conducted by students. In the blink of an eye, the research that I had worked so hard to get up and running for years was shut down, and there was nothing I could do about it. So I was struggling with the fact that I used to identify as an academic and as a researcher, and now I didn't have any active research, and I was thinking of leaving academia. I really wasn't sure where I fit into the field, or what impact I could have if I wasn't conducting research. I was struggling to find my place. So I did a lot of thinking and a lot of observing of myself and of others, and I started to take a more global perspective on the field. Around that same time, Brian Cutler asked me whether I would consider serving as an associate editor for Law and Human Behavior, and I was hesitant to do so because I didn't know if he was asking me because I was me or asking me because I had a faculty appointment at John Jay. When I voiced my concerns to Brian and told him that I was in the process of leaving academia, he told me that he didn't care what my professional affiliation was, but that he wanted me on his team. So I agreed to join his team, and I've been on Team Brian ever since. Serving as an associate editor under Brian Cutler and now under Margaret Covera has provided me with the opportunity to observe our field firsthand, to read the work of a broad array of colleagues and in diverse topics related to psychology and law, and to gain a perspective on all the ways in which the work we do in this field can be applied. And one day, out of the blue, I got a call from Alan Goldstein, who told me about this wonderful series that he was developing for Oxford with Kirk Halbrin and Tom Grisso, and asking me if I would take the lead on the best practices in the evaluation of competency to stand trial book. He explained that the goal of the series would be to distill the literature and for this book on competence, and to describe the empirically based best practices in competency evaluation for practitioners. Well, I had written for practitioners before. After all, Every chapter to which I had contributed to a book was targeted towards researchers, practitioners, scholars, and students, so how hard could it be? I said yes. And of course, misery loves company, so I asked Ron if he wanted to join me on this adventure, and he agreed. Over the course of writing that book with Ron, I came to realize the importance of targeting your audience and of selecting information relative to that audience to share. I also came to realize that I really enjoyed translating research for an audience that will use it in their practice. After completing the book, Ron came up with the brilliant idea of compiling a handbook for lawyers where we would have each of the book authors in that series contribute a chapter that would be geared toward legal professionals and that would describe the relevant information that they would need to know about each of these areas of forensic mental health practice. So again, I got the opportunity to write a chapter and then to edit a series of chapters that would target yet another type of audience. And throughout this process, I became comfortable and experienced with translating the research we do in this field to various audiences. And I was starting to find myself. And I was learning a lot about our field. Jennifer Scheme, in her presidential address last year, and other APLS presidents before her, such as Randy Otto, Kirk Halbrin, Jim Ogloff, and Ron Resch, have spoken about the importance of broadening our discipline. And the importance of this message cannot be underscored. Jen spoke about the importance of not becoming too specialized and of asking bigger questions and the advantages of becoming truly interdisciplinary. In essence, she was highlighting the need for us to build bridges between psychology and law, and between psychology and law and other disciplines, so that we might broaden the impact of our field. So while the red nodes represent psychology and law, the blue nodes would represent neurobiology, healthcare reform, reproductive technology, educational policy, all of the various disciplines for which our work in psychology and law could be applicable. I would like to take this message and expand on it by underscoring the importance of disseminating the work that we do in this field as the crucial strategy for broadening our discipline. That is, building bridges between disciplines, to be sure, but also building bridges between our field and the various audiences that can benefit from the knowledge that we generate. The green nodes here would represent each of the various audiences that the work in our field might impact: educators, healthcare professionals, policymakers, corrections administrators, and so on. For decades, I really only thought in terms of producers and consumers. That is, either being a producer of science, a researcher, or being a consumer of science, one who didn't contribute to the science per se, but who read it and learned from it. And of course, there are many in this room who are both producers and consumers of our science. But what I have now come to realize is that there is also a third crucial role, that of disseminator. And the role of disseminator can be taken on by both producers and consumers of our science. The implications of our work in this field are far-reaching. However, in order for our field to thrive, we need to communicate its importance, relevance, and application to a wider, broader, extended audience. The key to expanding our field is to reach more people with an explanation of the applicability of our work. And there are so many for whom our work is applicable: policymakers, legal professionals, mental health professionals, those in related disciplines such as corrections, social work, forensic nursing, law enforcement. And in addition to these various audiences, we also have a social responsibility to disseminate the implications of our work in this field to the public. It's important not to lose sight of the fact that we are all privileged. We have the privilege of having an education, even if we had to work our asses off to get here. I'm not trying to diminish our accomplishments or minimize the amount of time, effort, and resources that each and every one of us put into obtaining that education, but it's important to remember that along with the privilege of having an education comes the responsibility to share our knowledge with others. And I would argue that the higher your education, the greater your responsibility to share your knowledge. What that means is pretty much every single one of us in this room has a professional and social responsibility to share our knowledge. Being good citizens of the world requires us to share our science with those who can use it. So if the goal is to broaden the impact of our field, and if the key to broadening the impact of our field is to reach more people with an explanation of the applicability of our work, then in addition to building those bridges between disciplines, we also need to build bridges between our field and the various audiences that we are attempting to reach. Our current primary means of dissemination, publishing in academic journals, speaking at conferences, targets a relatively insular audience, which, while technically discharges us of our responsibility to share the results of our work, it minimizes the impact that our work can have on a larger, more diverse audience. Most of us do not disseminate beyond a relatively small, relatively well-defined, relatively insular audience, beyond which we do not engage in a planful process of communicating the importance or the applicability of our work. But science communication is defined as the successful dissemination of knowledge with a wide range of audiences, including non-scientists. So how do we go about doing this? There are 3 steps that we need to take in order to be able to effectively communicate our science to those who can use it. Define your audience, choose the right words, share the message. Define your audience, choose the right words, share the message. It's that simple. So what do I mean by define your audience? Defining your audience means figuring out who can benefit from the knowledge that you intend to share. In marketing, this is called your target audience. So while the easiest answer is readers of Law and Human Behavior, or readers of Psychology, Public Policy, and Law, or readers of insert journal name here, those are not the only audiences that can benefit from the knowledge that we have to share. The knowledge that we generate in this field is also relevant to policymakers, legal scholars, practicing legal professionals, and mental health practitioners. But it's also relevant to law enforcement and correctional personnel, and healthcare professionals, and undergraduate students interested in the field, and primary and secondary school educators, and high school students, and the general public. Jeremy Blumenthal made the point that to the extent that the purpose of every law is to control human behavior, every law is ripe for psychological study. So if every law is ripe for psychological study, then there is no limit to the number of potential audiences that our work can impact given the breadth and variability in the law. Just as we would typically think about which journal to submit our manuscript or to which conference we should submit our results for presentation, so too should we be thinking about who else can benefit from the knowledge to be imparted by our work. What other audiences, broadly defined, could potentially benefit from knowing this information? In Jen Skeem's presidential address, she cited an Adventures in Academia article by Danny Crichton, who spoke about the trend away from specialization and towards the integration of discipline into larger areas of knowledge, and the fact that those who have the largest impact are those who are able to see the connections among multiple paradigms. Jen spoke about the importance of targeting a broader audience and of being prepared and adaptable, of being able to draw on a body of research and make connections to current events or relevant topics of interest. She spoke about being prepared for teachable moments and the importance of having a broad marketplace for ideas. So it's up to us to think about all the potential ways in which the knowledge in our field can be used, how the work that we do impacts each of the potential audiences for the work. And the key is to think beyond the usual or the typical to make connections between the knowledge generated in our discipline and other disciplines and other audiences, such as legal scholars and practitioners, policymakers, lobbyists, healthcare professionals, educators, police, correctional professionals, and on and on. And the best thing about all of this is that you don't have to be a producer of the research or the knowledge in order to disseminate it. You can be a consumer of the research or knowledge and engage in the very important role of dissemination. The key is to get the information in front of the right audience. One way to do this is to build an audience of your own. For example, President Obama's team has compiled an enormous email list comprised of many millions of supporters and donors over the course of his 2 presidential campaigns. This is one of the ways in which the president reaches his audience, his supporters, his donors. The president also has a Twitter account at Barack Obama with 56.6 million followers. a number of Facebook pages, an official website, barackobama.com, a YouTube channel, a MySpace page, and a Pinterest profile, among others. He is building his audience on these various platforms, and as a result, he is able to reach a wider audience. Not everyone will follow him on Twitter, but some people will check his website regularly, others will read his emails, others will find information on YouTube, and others will read traditional media such as newspapers and magazines. He meets his audience where they live, whether that be on Facebook, Twitter, the web, YouTube, email, or traditional media. A complementary strategy to building your own audience is to use audiences that already exist. For example, President Obama appearing on Jimmy Kimmel. This is an example of President Obama attempting to reach a younger audience of voters. Obama is appearing on Jimmy Kimmel to get his message out to Jimmy's audience. So he's using Jimmy's audience to broaden his impact. For us as an organization, our primary audience at present is our own members. So we try to reach that audience primarily by sending emails and by posting information on our website. And we're trying to use Facebook a little bit to engage our members as well as non-members with similar interests who happen to find us on Facebook. But to have a broader impact, we must also work to disseminate our messages more broadly to others who can use the information. And we can do this partially by engaging with the audience of other allied professional organizations. So for example, the American Psychological Association has about 100,000 members, anywhere between 88,000 and 137, depending on where you get your information. The Association for Psychological Science has 20,000 members according to their website. So we can share our information with these organizations to disseminate to their audiences. As part of my presidential initiative for this division, which is to put together a communication strategy, both internal to our organization to reach our own members and external to reach a broad array of audiences, I've been working with a committee of members who have volunteered to assist in this initiative. One of the things that we put together was a competitive analysis. I can't stop myself from using air quotes whenever I talk about competitive analysis because I really come from a mindset of abundance and there being more than enough for all, and that working together in cooperation is much better than working against each other in competition. And so rather than think about who we compete with for members, I'd much prefer to think about who we can ally with or partner with for members and to disseminate information. And so we created a spreadsheet of various organizations that are attempting to reach audiences that would be interested in the knowledge coming out of our division. And the spreadsheet contains no fewer than 26 organizations that we could partner with or target with some of our messages that would be relevant to their members. And that is literally a drop in the bucket, those 26. So in addition to the broader American Psychological Association, there are several divisions within APA for whom our work would be appropriate. There are organizations such as the European Association of Psychology and Law, the International Association of Forensic Mental Health Services, the Society for Empirical Legal Studies, the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, the Harvard Center for Law, Brain and Behavior, the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences, and on and on. In addition to targeting our own members and targeting the members of other allied organizations, we can also engage in a strategy of dissemination that will attract new members and that will reach members with various interested publics. When we look at membership numbers for APA divisions over the years, we see a decline in the number of members in each division across the board. APA has 54 divisions, beginning about 1998 or 1999, and some have attributed this to the increased use of the internet and the widespread availability of information online, which reduces the need to belong to a division in order to obtain relevant information. Here we can see our own membership numbers, and these are membership numbers for our members who belong to APA, so it misses out on members who don't belong to APA, but what we see here is a decline in our membership starting about 2000 and continuing to the present. Some divisions have begun aggressive campaigns to increase the value of being a member, so offering more information and more resources to their member in an attempt to gain members and to engage with interested non-members at the same time. So for example, Division 15, Educational Psychology, uses an aggressive inbound marketing strategy wherein they work to create content and opportunities that draw in new interest-based web traffic that simultaneously engages their own members. So their communications director coordinates communications, which includes the Psychology Today blog, which is co-branded Psychology Today and Division 15, and which provides a means for Division 15 members to reach the public. They have a dedicated job website, which receives about as much traffic as their regular website, and builds bridges, the communication director's words in this instance, not mine, between Division 15 and educational psychology programs around the world. They have a weekly digest in which they release hand-picked stories in education, research, policy, and news, and share important divisional information with their members. And these are only a few examples of the ways in which the members of an organization and members of the public can be reached with our messages. So we need to think about who we want to reach with our message and how we might be able to reach them. And the same rules apply to us as individuals as they do to us as an organization. When we share information as individuals, we need to think about who can benefit from the information that we're about to share and how can we reach those individuals. So once we've defined our audience, the next step is to choose the right words. We need to figure out our message. The same message does not apply to all audiences. The message needs to be targeted to the specific audience that we intend to reach. The first step in this process is to think about your audience and what the most important points are to get across to that particular audience. What is the one take-home message that you want to instill in that audience? Does the information that you're about to share have policy implications, implications for practicing psychologists, for legal practitioners, for educators, for those who do research in a particular area, for the general public, for veterans in combat, for a specific segment of the population, such as those who've suffered a trauma or those who have family members who are incarcerated? Think about the potential implications of the information you're about to share for the relevant audiences, and then target the message to be relevant and specific to that audience. We know that short messages are easier to remember than longer ones. We want to make our messages miniature, memorable, and meaningful. The science of science communication literature tells us that we can teach anything to anyone as long as we provide synthesis, visualization, and context. So we need to synthesize the data, distill it, summarize it, integrate it, boil it down to the key points that we want to use, and then use visualization in our presentation of the information. We know that people have an easier time understanding when we provide visuals, charts, graphs, photographs, images, and not simply taking the words that we're using and putting them on the screen. The literature on online pedagogy tells us that we learn most effectively when we use multiple modalities. So when we show images at the same time that we present something verbally. And contrary to what most of us do when we're teaching our classes, showing the words that we're saying on the screen at the same time as we're saying them is a less effective way to get our message across. And then if we think back to our early psychology courses about how people learn, we know that we go through a process of assimilation and accommodation, of assimilating and integrating new information with that we already know. And so providing a context about the information that we present makes it easier to understand. Presenting information within the context of information that we already know makes it easier for us to understand and more likely that we'll remember it. And then finally, when we look in the literature on the best way to present information, we know that 3 is the optimal number of points to make. As an audience, we really can't handle much more than 3 points. So 1 or 2 is fine. 3 seems to be the optimal number of points to make. And of course, we know that repetition is key, so we want to tell our audience what we're going to tell them, tell it to them, and then tell them what we told them. Steve Jobs, in his presentations and in his press releases, followed a tried and true formula. He outlined 3 points for his audience, returned to the first point, explained each one in more depth, and then summarized each point. This simple formula ensures that your audience will retain the information that you're sharing. So we want to choose the right words for our audience, make our messages miniature, memorable, and meaningful, and use synthesis, visualization, and context that our audience will understand. So once we define our audience and choose the right words, we want to share the message. The Greek poet Homer wrote about the use of smoke signals to communicate long distances around 1200 BC. Cyrus, the king of Persia, used carrier pigeons to communicate with various parts of his empire in the 6th century. And the carrier pigeon was the primary means of long-distance communication until the introduction of the telegraph in 1837. The telephone was introduced in 1876, the radio in 1901, the television in 1928, and the internet in 1969. The way in which we communicate has changed vastly over the last several decades. New and varied sources of communication exist where they did not before the advent of technology. And in fact, it was Ron Resch who introduced me, as that young, naive graduate student, to the World Wide Web, his words, but when I was a graduate student in 1993 or 1994. Back then, I was still using Norton to do word processing, and word processing was about the extent of my use of technology, as I'm sure it was for many of us. And now, after moving to Florida, but continuing to work in New York, I use technology all the time. I started learning about online teaching and how to structure classes so that students would get the most out of an online environment. And I started to understand the ways in which we can leverage technology to do things that we've never been able to do before. How awesome is it that we can teach students all over the world from anywhere in the world? Technology has made geography irrelevant. And with the advent of these new technologies has come more and more ways to communicate our messages. We can reach more people with our messages now than ever before. But the one thing that has remained consistent is that we have always been social networkers. In this day and age, we sometimes forget that the original social networks are exactly that, networks of individuals with whom we are connected in some way. From our births, we form connections with those around us, family, friends, schoolmates, colleagues, sports teams. And what we do in these social networks is engage in conversation. Of course, now with the advent of social media, we have no end of ways in which to engage with our social networks. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of social media networking sites, but the one thing they all have in common is that they provide a platform to form connections with others. We have never been so connected. And with that connection comes the opportunity to share our messages with millions. Social media platforms allow us the opportunity to make connections and to reach more people than those in our immediate social networks. On any social media platform, we are connected to certain individuals, our Facebook friends, our Twitter followers, our LinkedIn connections, and then we are also connected to others through those connections. So just like the Fabergé organic shampoo commercial of the early 1980s, I tell two friends, then they tell two friends, and so on and so on. So we're able to reach exponentially more people than we would without using social networks. And social media networks are here to stay, and they continue to grow in both size and number. 2 years ago, the stats were that if Facebook were a country, it would be second in population size only to China. Social media reaches more people than ever and has an impact on science. Did you know that if an article is tweeted about, it is more likely to be cited in the scientific literature later on? We see evidence that requests for proposals, both private and federally funded research, are influenced by the chatter on social media. My own experience has been such that some of us are more resistant to using these social media platforms to get our messages across than others. And truly, I think that part of this is because the technology is new and it's not something that we ever really learned about, and so we're just not clear about the rules of engagement. But a little information can go a long way in this regard. So anyone who teaches online knows that for the most part, online learning is a relatively new phenomenon to many of our students, and so we need to provide our students with the rules of engagement. In my syllabus, I call these the netiquette guidelines. So these are rules and guidelines for how to interact with others in the online forum. Silly things like just because we're on an online discussion board doesn't mean that spelling and grammar go out the window. Still need to use full sentences and spell words correctly. And then other things that those who are unfamiliar with an online environment might not know, such as the use of all caps is generally interpreted as shouting and should be kept to a minimum. But providing these rules and guidelines allows our students to understand how to engage with others in the online world. And similarly, I think that we also need to be careful about assuming that everyone understands how social media platforms work. For example, my students and I have been writing these translating research into practice posts where we take recent articles from Law and Human Behavior, Psychology, Public Policy and Law, and the International Journal of Forensic Mental Health, and we summarize the information to be relevant to practicing professionals, and then we publish these posts on social media platforms. The purpose of this is to get these resources out to as many practicing professionals as possible. So those who understand the rules of engagement know that quite literally the reach of a post, how many people it is actually going to be seen by, is determined by the level of engagement that others have with that post. So when someone clicks the like button on Facebook, or favorites a tweet, or clicks the little thumbs up on LinkedIn, that post is going to go even further and be seen by more people. And even better, if you make a comment on a post or share that post, it gets distributed onto the news feeds of even more individuals and is seen by a larger audience. So when you see the APLS Student Committee share a post on Facebook, give it a like, or even better, make a comment or share that post so that it reaches a wider audience. And when you make a post, don't assume that others will understand the rules of engagement. Be explicit. Ask them to share the information with others. More engagement means that the information will be seen by more people. And engagement really is the key here. Social media platforms allow us to start a conversation, to ask questions in an attempt to engage with those in our networks. And engaging with your audience is really what this is all about. If you look at the literature on marketing and business principles, what you find is that the strategies that are used are borrowed heavily from social psychology. And social psychology tells us how to engage others in a way that will change the way they think, feel, or act. These literatures talk a lot about persuasion and building trust and getting our messages across in a genuine and relatable way. And what we see in the science of communication literature, and more in the science of science communication literature, is the need to be authentic and genuine and to make a connection with our audience. And one of the best ways to make a connection is through storytelling. Randy Olson, who is a marine biologist and a filmmaker, published a book entitled "Don't Be Such a Scientist: Talking Substance in an Age of Style." And in this book, he describes how there has been a negligence when it comes to teaching scientists how to communicate. The book is written for his fellow scientists, and what he tells them is that they need to lighten up. His position is that scientists are ultimately the most responsible for promoting and explaining the science to the public and to the media, and he argues that this should be done with a good grasp of social science, which indicates that scientists must use persuasive and effective means like storytelling. Similarly, journalist Robert Krulwich, who serves as a science correspondent on NPR, National Public Radio, delivered a commencement address to Caltech students entitled "Tell Me a Story," where he urged scientists to seize opportunities to explain something interesting about their science and underscored the importance of telling stories. He argued that telling stories about science in practice not only provides context and helps make the information more memorable and easier to understand, but that storytelling also helps convey that scientists are real people. And we know from social science that we connect best with real people, with those who are genuine and who we can relate to. So it's important for us to tell our stories and to allow others to see our genuine selves so that they can relate to where we're coming from and how we see the world. We want to disseminate our knowledge in a way that allows us to bring out our personalities and make connections with others. We want to be real and genuine and share our message in a relatable way. So in summary, technology and social media have provided the means for us to connect with more people than ever and to get our messages across to more than ever before. If we engage in a planful process of communication through various social platforms, we will be able to communicate the importance, relevance, and application of the knowledge created in our field to a wider, broader, more diverse audience. There's a crucial need for each of us to act as disseminators of that information created in this field, and we can do that by defining our audience, choosing the right words, and sharing our message in a relatable way. Building bridges between disciplines changes a field. Building bridges between the field and those who can use the knowledge that field generates changes the world. Remember, small actions can have a big impact. So think big indeed, Joel DeVoskin. Let's change the world one small step at a time. Thank you for listening, and thank you for allowing me to serve as your president.